and has done some great work with infrastructure and resilience. So take it away, Meagan.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank y'all for sharing some of your Friday with me. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Can y'all see that?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay. So I'm going to give you kind of a very granular view of what we as the city of New Orleans do to combat climate change, to help with this really rapidly evolving world that we live in. You know, Roger talked about all the Storm Act and, you know, all these things that are being done in other parts of Louisiana, and New Orleans is just as vulnerable, more so lately to these kind of summer storms that we're getting. We've been incredibly thankful and fortunate that most hurricanes have kind of gone around us, but that doesn't mean that we're out of the danger zone. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that we've been working on to combat the flooding and hopefully reduce some of those economic impacts that Roger talked about, trying to keep water away from homes, from buildings, from cars, and making sure that folks can access their property and valuables at any given time. So we're working to make a more resilient New Orleans through our infrastructure specifically. So last year we had one of our wettest springs in since 1871. We've in 2020, actually, in just the month of July, we got about 15 inches of rain, and that is historical for New Orleans to have surpassed that amount, and just to accumulate that much amount of water in 1 month. But in spring of 2021, in total, we got about 35 inches of rain. For the entire year, our annual rainfall is about 60-ish inches, 62 inches. The way that we're accumulating that and how quickly we're accumulating it over certain months is what's starting to give us the problem. So on the yearly average, we're about the same. It's just how quickly we get to that number is what's becoming the problem. So to combat that, we have the Urban Water Plan. Back in 2015, I believe, this mindset was really what kind of kicked off this whole green infrastructure resilience that we are working on. So the idea of it is to retain water as close to where it falls through detention ponds, through bioswales, through rain gardens, whatever that may be, store it for as long as possible to allow some of that water to get throughout the other parts of the city to get into the drainage system, and then let our pumps take it, and then we drain. So we hold all of our water, and then once the peak of the storm passes, and then we try to release it very slowly back into the system. We are a city that relies heavily on our pump stations, and we cannot get away from that completely. So our approach has to be a gray and a green approach. So our infrastructure has to kind of work together in both senses. It can't all be one versus the other. We're a highly impervious area. We have a lot of overdeveloped areas. So we don't have a lot of green space to kind of naturally do what water wants to do, which is to kind of sit in those green spaces. A lot of people often reference the Netherlands and the work that they're doing. And it's very similar to what we are trying to accomplish here. So we have started implementing green infrastructure in combination with gray infrastructure improvements. So we upsize our drainage system. We are implementing these different storage methods throughout the city. And also just our topography makes this a little difficult to get away from this threat because we sit very low. So we naturally have to rely on that pumping system to get that water out. So like I said, the aging infrastructure is also a little bit of an issue here with us. So we've really started to tailor our approach to stormwater management to adapt to this climate change by having both of these aspects as a priority. We have been very fortunate to have many federally funded programs to help us with this. We have the Hazard Mitigation Program, the National Disaster Resilience Grant, the Go Mesa funding, and then the Downtown Development Districts. All of these are really specific to improving our stormwater management practices. And most of these, especially the hazard mitigation and the NDRC, kicked off in about 2015, 2016 when we were awarded these grants. And we've been using this to implement a bunch of different versions of green and gray infrastructure to manage stormwater a little bit differently. This is one of our featured projects that was under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. We spent about $15 million in both construction and design, and we implemented a couple different types of green infrastructure. We have pervious pavement, we have street basins, we converted about 30 vacant residential lots into essentially large detention ponds. We have 2 stormwater parks in which we converted the neutral ground or the median to those detention ponds as well. And in total, with all of these interventions, we're able to hold about just over 8 million gallons of water before it gets back into our gray system. And that really helps us. We've been getting a ton of rain over these last probably 3 weeks. I think we've had rain every day for the last 3 weeks. And it's keeping everything damp and wet, and it makes it really hard to give our gray infrastructure a break. So the green infrastructure comes in and allows us to hold that water for a little bit of time. Our Hagen-Lafitte project is another one under the Hazard Mitigation Program, and it holds just about 1 million gallons of water. And something different that we did here is we utilized the underground tank systems at a local park to allow some of that water to store under the park. And then on a dry day, whenever we do get those, you're still able to go out and access the park. We try to approach it from like a multifunctional facility. We want most of our features to not only be a large pond. In some cases that makes sense. In some places we want to maximize the use of the spaces that we have. And then these are some of the other programs and projects that we are doing to, again, combat the climate change. We have the Gentilly Resilience District, in which we currently have about $84 million worth of stormwater management and improvements that are under design, which will allow us to store about 13 million gallons of water. We're a little bit behind schedule. I think that's fairly normal with anything that's federally funded, but more than 30 million of these projects will be under construction probably by end of this year, early next year. And then on a little bit of a smaller scale, what we're doing to assist homeowners is our community adaptation program, in which we partnered with one of our city agencies, the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, to appropriate about, I think it's about $25,000 per household for low to moderate income households to implement stormwater management on their property to help combat this. So I think we've done about 100 projects so far in which we've been able to help residents combat this on a really small scale, on a very personal scale though. And you can see here, this is a little bit of a before and after. You can see the transformation. We installed pervious pavement or the actual pavers within the driveway of this resident's home because they were experiencing a ton of flooding, which meant they weren't actually able to get out of their home, out of their property and onto the street because the water was so high. They could never even see, exactly where the dangers fell. And then something we're doing on more of a gray infrastructure approach. We have a $2.4 billion roadwork program. And what we are doing to combat the climate change with that is, one, we're upgrading our infrastructure. This is where you see a lot of our aging infrastructure is within the roadwork area. So our drainage system, our water system, our sewer system are very old. That's the easiest way to say that. But something else that has been a little bit of an issue is the material prices for all of these interventions has become very expensive over the last couple of years. So we're trying to really incorporate projects on the front end, inclusive of the stormwater management, to make the most comprehensive project so that we get the biggest bang for our buck. And then, of course, everyone, is aware of this, the Infrastructure Jobs Act. We are working continuously to identify the highest priority projects that will impact our water system, our sewer system, and our drainage system, and then how we can implement green infrastructure to assist with that. So I know I rolled through a lot of these things really quickly, but I wanted to, so that in case we had any questions, we could have a discussion there. So that is it for my presentation. I'm open for questions if you guys have any.
Thank you so much, Megan. And yeah, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and just say them, or put them in the chat and I can read them out if you don't want to be on mic.